Hi, Jamie. How are you
Hey, how's
today?
it going? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Cool.
Awesome.
All right.
Sweet. How's your day been going?
Pretty good. I was having issues like finding the session thing didn't show up like 5 minutes ago, and then it just started showing up. So I don't know if that's because like you activated
Wow.
it or
Yeah.
something.
It shows up 5 minutes before the scheduled time.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. Um,
That's cool.
Sweet. Let me just give you a quick rundown. So I'll go ahead and introduce you, and then you can take it from there, and then we'll all hop back on call, and we can answer questions together. So we can do that. Sound good?
Sounds good.
Awesome. So we'll just give it a few minutes, and then once people start rolling in, we can get started.
Cool. Sounds great.
All right, let's get started. It's 2.
Cool.
Okay.
Let's do it.
Hi, everyone. So many businesses have skyrocketed and have achieved high levels of growth in a short period of time. Today, we're going to teach you how to do the same in this workshop. Today, we have here Jamie Quint, former head of growth at Notion. Before joining Notion, Jamie was a senior director at product monetization at Reddit, building out the revenue product org from scratch and leading it to 3x times revenue. He's a growth advisor and has consulted for companies including Twitch, Everlane, and Credit Sesame. You can take it from here, Jamie.
Well, hey, how's it going? It's nice to meet all of you. And it'd be great to chat with you about growth. Honorit, are we doing a Q&A here? What's the format?
So you can go ahead and just introduce yourself, anything you want to talk about, and if you want to go ahead and start with Q&A after, we can do that, right?
Okay.
So,
Yeah. So Yeah, I'm Jamie. It's nice to meet all of you. If you have general questions about growth or like how to get started in your career, if you want to go into like product or growth roles, feel free to hit me up on Twitter. It's just my name, so you should be pretty easy to find. Like Anrit said, I was most recently at Notion. I'm now investing full time. But before that, I built and ran the ads business at Reddit, and then various other startups and Y Combinator and some other things before that. I've been focused on growth for kind of like the last 15 years. Wasn't really even a thing, I guess, 15 years ago when I graduated. And so it's been interesting to kind of watch this field develop and see what it's turned into. And yeah, I think it would be best if we just do some Q&A, and I'm happy to just discuss whatever about my background that would be helpful, either from the audience or if you have prepared questions, we can start there.
We have both. Let's start off with a few Q&As since I see a few in the chat. The first one is, what is one of the most important things to consider when designing your life?
When designing your life, that's a tough question. I think, obviously like you're balancing things, right? So you're balancing like both what you want in your personal life and what you want in your professional life. I think for everyone, it's a little bit different. And, you kind of have to make sacrifices depending on what you want. So like, if you want to be, extremely materially or like financially successful, you're going to work harder than like someone who doesn't care as much about that. And that's something you're going to have to accept. And it doesn't mean that you're not going to have fun and it won't be a great time along the way, but you're just going to live a little bit of a different lifestyle. So I think it kind of starts with figuring out what you want. And then, once you're there, I think career-wise, you have to kind of like balance what you're looking for at every stage in your career. So like early on, like right out of school, I started companies and I didn't know what I was doing, and I learned a lot really fast. And that was an interesting experience for me and a great experience. There's other people who like have done it differently, but I think early on in your career, you should really optimize for learning as much as possible. And so that could be starting a company, or it could be going to some place that's like growing quickly. I think the most important thing is to be at some place that's growing quickly, because you'll have the opportunity to learn so fast. And, I guess there's a lot of ways we could take this question, but I'll just stop there.
No, that's a wonderful answer. I definitely agree. So the next question is, what are some guiding principles to help us decide on choosing a dot to embark on?
On choosing a what to embark on?
A dot to embark on. I guess like choosing a path essentially that you want to go forth, and how you can like see growth in that long term versus short term.
Yes. I mean, for choosing like career-wise what you want to do, I think for choosing near-term career-wise what you want to do, I think it's a good idea to have a concept of like where you're going in like 5 years is like pretty good. So like if you're like in 5 years, I want to be a product manager at some particular company or something like that, or I want to be, I don't know, whatever your goal might be. And then you kind of have to like work backwards from there. So if it's like, you have an engineering degree, your goal is to go into product, and you want to be like a senior product manager or something in 5 years, then you can like reverse engineer how to achieve that. But you kind of have to start with where you want to be. And if you don't know what you want to be, then where you want to be in 5 years, then I would say just like figure out something that has like a lot of optionality where, if you do it, you have many paths that you can pursue kind of going forward from there.
Awesome. As for our next question, could you explain what growth is and kind of what you do essentially in your role?
Yeah. So right now I'm like, I'm running a seed and pre-seed, like investment fund. So my role now is like quite a bit different, but, I'll take it in the context of like what I would be doing as like a product manager working on growth at, some tech company. So growth it's pretty broad. I mean, in general, what people kind of conceptualize it as is you're working on making changes to a product to try and improve the performance of that product. And so generally the way that would break down is you're trying to improve either acquisition, like users coming in the top of the funnel, activation, the rate at which people who like sign up or basically complete onboarding and start using the product, retention, which is like the rate at which people kind of come back and continue using the product, and then revenue, which is obviously how you're monetizing those users that are basically coming back and using the product. And from a product perspective, like what you end up doing there is you end up doing a lot of data analysis or working with data analysts or a data science team to do data analysis. That provides some insights. And then you basically like come up with hypotheses for things that you could change in the product that would like improve performance alongside along one of those 4 metrics that I mentioned. And then you run experiments to kind of determine, to basically get there. So you run A/B tests or other experiments. Other components of growth can be things like paid marketing, email marketing. Like there's a lot of different things, a lot of different levers you can pull. And so like it ends up being like a career path where you kind of learn about all those different things like over time.
Awesome. As for our next question, what mistakes do founders usually make early on when they think about growth?
I actually think the mistake that a lot of founders make is focusing on it too early. I think that you can't like you can't growth hack your way to product market fit. And what I mean by that is that, growth is a way to incrementally improve the performance of your product. And usually what you're doing is like removing barriers from users doing things that they're trying to do already, to make processes more efficient. But like if your product doesn't already have something that, at least some small segment of hardcore power users are really excited about, then the most important thing you can do is find that first. And I think a lot of founders, they kind of get stuck because their product's not really working. They're like, we need to hire a growth person. We need to do a bunch of experimentation. And like really what they need to do is talk to users and figure out what users want and build that, rather than try and get too metrics focused too early. So I think that's actually the biggest mistake people make.
As for our next question, what do people usually get, kind of based on what you just mentioned, what do people get wrong about growth usually? Like any misconceptions that they have about the career in general, or like when they're working in the field?
So I think some misconceptions are that it's all just about like finding these ways to like trick users and do like these like dark patterns and things that users hate and hide the cancel button and all this different kind of stuff. And it's not really about that at all. Like, the way I think about growth is like, I'm working at some company. We have some product that's like awesome. We know it's awesome because there's hundreds of thousands or millions of users who are super happy with it and have a great experience. And like the job in growth is to like remove the friction from other users having that same experience, like systematically and using experimentation. It's not about like tricking users. And so I think that's like one misconception. In terms of like misconceptions of like the career, I'm not really sure. Like, I don't really know how people are like conceptualizing it. So.
Sweet. So for our next question, does it always make sense to just focus on big channels like Facebook, or is it worth it experimenting with smaller and niche ones like Snapchat or Discord?
The answer is it depends. I mean, usually what happens with a company is they find one channel that's like the channel that works best for them. And once companies find that, I really highly recommend they spend most of their focus on that. So like I worked with companies and we've experimented with like Facebook, Google, Reddit, Twitter, Instagram, whatever ads. And like we run through an experimentation phase. And after that phase, it's like pretty apparent that one channel is working better than all the rest of them. And then, the rational thing to do is to basically try and spend as much money as possible in that channel first before even thinking about spending money anywhere else. If you're like small and scrappy and like for whatever reason you don't think you can be competitive on some of these other channels, like I think that it's totally reasonable to explore kind of alternative channels. I think that you ideally want to be in a place where you feel like it's growing fast enough that that might become a sustainable channel for you. So for example, like TikTok or Discord or something like that, those may be fast enough growing channels that like even if they're small now, then in 2, 3, 4 years, like that could be like your company can grow its marketing budget up with those other companies. So yeah, I mean, that's what a lot of e-commerce companies did with Facebook. Like the reason why there's so many of these direct-to-consumer e-commerce companies is literally because of Instagram and Facebook ads. And if Instagram and Facebook ads hadn't been so good, those companies wouldn't exist because Google doesn't work and like other channels don't work for those companies. So it's an example of how that can work.
Definitely. As for our next question, how is growth different from marketing, and how do the two work together?
Yeah, so actually what I've seen work best is, and this is kind of how Notion worked, is on the marketing side, you have someone who's thinking about the brand and positioning and how the brand comes across to users. And they're thinking about like, how do we have consistent messaging and like, what do we want our brand to represent in people's minds? And they're like basically producing all of the content that is going to get distributed to potential customers or all of these different things. And then on the growth side, growth was responsible for taking that content or working with the marketing team and taking that content and activating it in different channels and testing it to kind of produce optimum results. So it was like marketing was producing the content and growth was like testing the content. And this, when I say growth, I mean growth marketing. So then there's a whole nother aspect of growth, which isn't really marketing at all, which is like you're just in the product itself. And so that's like you're making changes to onboarding, you're making changes to like how invites work, you're making changes to like, notifications and stuff like that. And those are things meant to drive users back to the product. Those are like less involved with like the marketing side of things. The most crossover thing is like things like drip email marketing, where you're like triggered email marketing, where some users doing some action and then you're sending them an email, and like you want to have the marketing team involved with producing that content, but you want to have the growth team involved with like testing that content and like across 3 different variations that the marketing team put together, which one works the best, and then how do we kind of like deploy that and push it out to everyone, and then how do we both do that and then turn around and like chat with the marketing team and be like, hey, like this is what worked best, just like FYI, so in the future.
Awesome. As for our next question, what's a good way to set growth goals, and do you try to be ambitious or conservative in terms of like a big tech company or like a small tech company?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that early on, I try and focus more on like the inputs and the outputs. So I try and make sure that like, we're doing as many, like, I would try and make sure we're doing as many like high leverage things as possible. I think it's like sometimes counterproductive to set goals if you have literally no idea what's reasonable. So for example, like early on at a startup, you could be like, well, we want to grow 10x. And it's like, well, like, is that even possible? Like you can set it as a goal, but like it's kind of demoralizing if you have like no realistic way of hitting it. Like once you get to becoming like a bigger company, so like, Reddit when I was there, when I left, was like 400 something people. Even at like 150 people or something like that, your business is probably mature enough where growth isn't just like all over the place. It's like you have some sort of idea of like what a reasonably good but like hard to achieve goal would look like, and you kind of want to set it somewhere around there is what I think. So early on, I would focus more on like are we doing is there enough activity going on, and are we being intelligent about like what we're choosing to do, but are we just doing a lot of stuff? And then like later on it kind of flips and you can get more specific about setting goals. There are like CEOs and founders who would disagree with me there and be like, you should set a goal anyways. But it's not really how I like to work.
So just kind of like based off of your answer right now, how would you recommend structuring a new growth team, and what's the process you personally use to run experiments in your roles?
Yeah. So I think generally, like, you don't really want to establish a growth team too early. Usually like the right time, it was probably when you already have like one or two existing product teams. And so like company size wise, there's probably like 10, 12 engineers and maybe a couple of product managers and a couple of designers like already within the company before you're even like really thinking about establishing a growth team. And then like, say if you want your third team that you're kind of instantiating within the company to be a growth team, you're going to bring on like someone as like a growth product manager or someone who can like flex between growth product and like growth marketing, performance marketing type stuff. And then you're going to build out like a team of engineers around them. And then you're going to run, you're going to start working. Ideally on that team, either the product manager knows and can do like data analysis and knows SQL and like all of this kind of stuff, because that's like a prerequisite to doing growth stuff, is looking at the data first and understanding what's going on. And I super highly encourage like anyone who's interested in growth at all, or performance marketing, to learn SQL really well, because it's probably one of the most important tools still, even though there's all these existing, analytics packages like Amplitude and stuff like that. Still knowing SQL at the end of the day is incredibly important. And then in terms of like how we ran experimentation, at Notion and Reddit, we both built our own internal experimentation frameworks. Other companies will use kind of different things. There's some other companies like Launch Darkly and some of these other tools that will help you kind of put together an experimentation framework if you don't want to build it yourself internally. And that's probably like the right decision for most companies. But that's not really what we did at Notion and Reddit. And the other thing I would say on experimentation specifically is like, you want to be experimenting with things that are very different. So like Google can experiment with like different button colors and font sizes. Like no startup can experiment with different, no startup should be experimenting with those things. You should be testing things that are massively different from each other, because small differences require huge volumes of traffic to measure. And if you're working at a small company, you just don't have that. So
we have a question in the chat based on what you've been talking about. They asked that, how would you track growth and define the success metrics for it?
So it goes back to the things I was saying before, like you have acquisition, activation, retention, and revenue. Generally, like the most important thing at startups tends to be retention. And so like if you have a product that's like growing really fast, it's super viral, like imagine you have a product where like everyone refers like 10 people that sign up or something insane like that. Well, if your retention is 5%, like your company is going to grow until it's like exhausted all the people that everyone can invite, and then it will die because like your retention is 5%, which is horrible. And so like, even though for like every one user you get 10 users, you only on average retain like half of a user. And so your company's graph is going to look like this, and then it's just going to die. And so retention ends up being super important. In general, the way that most companies do this is they actually like model it out. So they'll build a growth model in like Google Sheets or Excel or something like that. And they'll look at activation, acquisition, and retention. And then you can kind of look at the numbers and figure out where the right place to focus is. And that's kind of what ends up happening. But most of the time it ends up being on retention.
Awesome. So the next question we have for you is, how important do you think it is to focus on the initial launch of the product versus longer term growth?
I think people over-index on the initial launch of products like by a lot. Probably like people focus on it too much by like an order of magnitude or something like that. There are a lot of companies that had splashy initial launches that like ended up failing. There's a lot of companies that never really had a launch that ended up succeeding, pretty massively. I think like almost no company grows. Well, I can't think of a single company that's been successful from like press as their major growth channel. And that's really what a big launch gets you, is it gets you a bunch of press and a bunch of initial users. And it's just not, that's not really sustainable. It might be good for like kicking off some product that you expect is going to grow virally. But I think 95% of the time, it just really doesn't matter at all.
So for our last question, we just want to kind of know a bit more about any advice you have on content marketing. So how you know if it's like a fad versus something that actually has potential to last long term.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a fad. Like all content marketing is like a way to get people to notice your brand by giving them something else they want, which is content. And so like that's, as long as people want to read content marketing will be a thing. And so I don't really think it's like a fad. Kind of like with all of these things, it's like people have limited attention, right? And so like if every business starts trying to like pick off some topic and like write about it and then expect to get people to read it and then find their company, if everyone's doing that all the time, then people are just going to have less attention to pay to each person who's doing that. And so it'll become less effective over time. Like where content marketing tends to be really successful is in areas where there's just like not very much content. And so like, for example, if you're doing like a company that's focused on, I don't know, for an example, like targeting early stage employees at startups for some reason. I don't even know what the product that would do that would be, but just as an idea, like, well, what do those people care about? And like, can you write about that? And are there like 100 other people writing about that? Like, in which case, like, it's probably not going to be successful to write about that. Or if there's nobody writing about it and people care about it a lot, then you're probably going to be really successful. And so it's really just like this arbitrage between like the existing content that exists in the market and what people care about reading about. And it will work well in particular areas and not in other areas.
Awesome. That kind of concludes our session for today. Thank you to everyone who attended, and thank you, Jamie, so much for all your insightful advice and answers. It was well appreciated.
Yeah, of course. If anyone has questions I didn't answer, just hit me up on Twitter or email me or whatever. Just let me know.
Awesome. Thank you so much for today.
All right. See ya.
Bye. Everyone else can hop over to the stage or the other sessions and join another event. Bye.